Hi, I'm Chris Webber and I'm a PhD student at Leeds Beckett University, and my research explores the transfer of learning. I've created a series of webinars, so some short videos about how we can best support transfer, and today's focus is on transfer planning. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, so the presentation is in two bits really. The first just provides a background and some context to set the scene, and then the second part sort of discusses a resource that I've been reading about and creating over the last year or so. So I think firstly it's important to define what transfer of learning actually is. Now this quote is quite old, but it's actually been used quite heavily within literature and research, and it refers to transfer as the extent to which knowledge, skills and attitudes acquired in one context or setting are applied to a different environment or situation. So it's quite broad really. So the current situation is there's a lot of money spent each year around the world on human development activities, whether that be formal education or whether that's training for employment or whether that's implementing learning and development into an existing organization. But most personal development attempts are underpinned by aspirations of either transfer of learning or behavior change to some degree. So the transfer problem, this has been studied for a long time, over 100 years, originally within education, maybe then shifting a little bit more towards cognitive psychology, and then more recently within training and development. Now, a lot of the literature and research suggests that transfer of learning does not readily occur and it's quite hard to come by. And estimates and suggestions from some of this research indicate only around 10 to 30% of what people actually learn on the course or during the event is applied or used beyond there. And 30% would be quite a positive figure, really. There's some nice statistics offered by a scholar that has done a lot of work on evaluating programs, and they highlight really that there's a small-ish group that do transfer successfully, equally about the same sort of numbers that don't really attempt to use any of this stuff after the course, but the vast majority of people do attempt to use something in a different setting or situation, but for whatever reason they give up or falter shortly after for various reasons. Now to me this just highlights really that there's a large group that can be influenced towards successfully transferring some of their learning with some changes made to current programs and practices. So there's a lot of potential gain to be leveraged, which is a good thing. Now there is hope yet, because we do know that transfer of learning does occur and it appears to be a malleable construct, and outcomes can be enhanced by certain activities and certain decisions that are made. But we know that transfer must be planned for and supported in order for that to happen. And there are specific activities that can enhance this more than others. They don't need to be grand and lavish and expensive. They can be quite small and quite simple to implement, which is positive news. Now, research often breaks the transfer system down into three components, and they focus on factors in relation to the participant, shown on the left, factors in relation to the program, so decisions about what the program looks like and how it's delivered in the middle, and then over on the far right, the transfer context, so that's sort of life after the course, factors there that may influence the likelihood of application. Now, we know that there's certain factors in relation to the participant that do lead to more transfer of learning. So if somebody, for example, feels that the course or the event is more relevant to them, they're likely to be more motivated to attend and more motivated to learn and get something from the experience. And the combination of those factors has been highlighted to lead to up to an additional 70% of transfer of learning as a result. So that's quite large. Now, some factors in relation to the program in the center, you can see have been highlighted as influential. So goal setting, for example, staff modeling desirable behaviors, or planning for transfer. And some of these factors combined can lead up to an additional 37% increase in transfer of learning. So a bit lower. And in the transfer context, we know this is very, very important, and actually how much support people get after the course and the culture around them is vital, really. And that's, you can see that from this figure. That can lead to a positive culture, and positive support can lead to up to an additional 79% transfer of learning occurring. And these figures are from one particular study. Now, the reason that the one in the middle is sort of ring fenced with a deeper line is the other two, although they have big potential gains, we have less control or influence really over who turns up on our courses and how motivated they are, and then also where they return to and how much support they're going to get at the other end after the course. But one thing that we can control a lot more in terms of delivering these events is what we do during them, you know, in terms of the program and the delivery. And all of these factors combined, if we were to target them simultaneously, can lead to massive additional increases in transfer. Hence the malleable construct shown above, which is good news. Now, as mentioned in the program section, we know that setting specific goals can increase transfer of learning, and this study in particular showed that it increased transfer and application by an additional 11%. Now we're going to use a bit of a metaphor here just to discuss goal setting. Often what people do is they would consider a goal. It might be quite vague, may not be that specific. So for example, here it's going to be sending a rocket to that crater on the moon. That's the goal, that's what we're aiming for. So we line our rocket up and we're full of motivation. We're really keen, we're raring to go, which in this case is our fuel. And we set off and we try our hardest, and often what may happen is the rocket may miss the target and we may not achieve what we set out to do. Now, I don't know a great deal about space travel, but I'd imagine there's quite a few different things that we would need to consider in order to successfully put that rocket into that crater. I would have thought there would be some complicated maths that would have to be done in relation to trajectories and all the physics involved. I'd have thought that you'd have to consider quite heavily who goes on this mission and the team dynamics and how they get on together. There would have to be a lot of training done and testing to see whether everything works successfully, the suits all work, and it all works in practice. And I presume there would have to be a lot of detailed calculations about weather on Earth, atmospheric conditions, and also conditions in space. So there's a lot of different processes needed in order to land that rocket on that moon. And people may overlook some of these processes, these important actions that are required to result in that outcome. And people may also forget to consider some of the friction involved, some of the barriers. And removing friction and barriers is often easier than providing more fuel and more motivation. So that is quite an important area for consideration. Now, we're just going to consider goal setting, focusing on the processes instead of the outcomes. So I'm going to create quite a specific goal. So let's say, for example, for me, it might be to reduce my body fat by 2%. So quite specific, quite measurable. Now, in order to achieve that, there could be a range of different behaviors or actions that I could take, really, and processes. Now, I could do that through my alcohol consumption. I could say that I'm only going to consume alcohol once per week, for example, which may limit my alcohol intake. I could do it through diet. So I could say, for example, that a third of all of my meals needs to be vegetables because I know that they're filling and they're low in calories. Or I could do it by physical activity. So I could say, for example, I could go running once a week for 20 minutes every Wednesday, say. So there's a range of different processes that I could focus on that would be likely to result in my desired goal. Now, I may choose the alcohol consumption one because for me that may work best and seem a smart decision. And for each one of those, ideally you would need to create this transfer plan to consider some of the details as to how you can implement some of these things in real life. Now, that transfer plan and investing some time here up front will hopefully enable you to stay on track and stay focused when you return to your everyday life, which can be quite turbulent and it's easy to get distracted. So for the rest of the video, I'm just going to talk through this resource really that I've been thinking about, reading about over the last year or so. So it's a blend of literature and research and theory, and I've tried to package it into a format that can be used really and applied. And it uses behavioral science and an effect called the endowment effect, which I can expand on a little bit later in a little bit more detail. But we know that creating detailed plans of how to implement our desired actions drastically enhances our success. This is a technique called implementation intentions, and it's proven to be very effective in behavioral science. This planning can break down large or complex tasks, and it prompts the learner to think about when, where, and how we can do some of these actions, and also encourages people to use learning as soon as possible. And by stacking several of these small strategies together that are related to transfer, can lead to a big impact, really. And one study found that stacking several of these things together led to a habit being implemented 28% more often than the group that didn't do this. And the endowment effect is a concept which here provides a template to advance people closer to their goals, and it reframes the task as something that people have already started, and it provides an illusion of progress, which can create greater persistence towards people's goals, and people are motivated to finish what they have started. And it's commonly used in coffee shops and coffee cards, hence the picture here where you get given a card and it's got a few stamps on already, rather than it being completely blank. Excuse me. So first of all then, I'm going to briefly discuss each of these components in turn of the resource really. So first of all, the main target. This is the desired outcome, and this focuses people's attention. And one study found that setting specific goals increased transfer by up to 11%. And we know that it's important to start small and focus on one new habit at a time, and ensure people don't take on too much and become overwhelmed or disheartened. So the next one is considering why this is important for me. Now, this rationally considers the personal benefits, and you do this in a cold state. So that means when you're calm and you're relaxed and you can think clearly. And without a big enough why, it becomes easier for us to give up on our goals and our plans. So these things must be important to us. It needs to come from within. It can't be to satisfy or impress other people. That's not enough. And these personal rewards help us to engage, and they help us to stay focused on the change process, which can be quite hard. And one study found considering the benefits was more effective for those people that may lack motivation. Now, considering the desired behaviors, this should focus on the key processes that will be required to produce your sort of overall goal. And it should focus on creating realistic and sustainable habits. And considering those actions that are needed to start realizing your outcomes. And when considering habit formation, these actions should be quick and they should be easy. And making things simple to engage with reduces friction. And it helps us overcome inertia, because once we've started things, it's often easier to continue. And small goals make success more likely. And then once we experience success, that then fuels motivation, not the other way around. And you get what you repeat. So the aggregation of these small gains over time can lead to big results. And I forgot to mention, actually, these little things up here that I've just included are about some examples of me trying to be more active at home, often through running. So the next point is time. So considering when, where, and how to undertake some of these key tasks or behaviors can help people achieve their goals. And this process led to over twice as many people following through with their exercise plans in one study. And it also increased engagement with flu vaccinations by 15% in another study. So just by considering this one small point can actually lead to quite large increases in people realizing their goals. Also, considering where you'll do something can increase your engagement. One study found this increased attendance at clinical appointments by 23%. So quite a large impact, really, from something that's so small. Let's move this out of the way. Also considering who you may be able to do this action or behavior with, because humans are social creatures, and making things social can make it seem a little bit more attractive to some people. And a great example of this is park run, I think, because every Saturday morning, if there's any new members that turn up, everybody there will give them a big round of applause, which is really great. It makes them feel nice. People get t-shirts to say how many runs that they've done so they can show to others. The results are displayed in a table so you can compare your times with other people that you know. And often people go for a coffee afterwards, so it just makes it pleasurable. And then this one here is considering implementing your behavior after something that you already do, an existing habit. Because if you pair your desired behavior with something that's already ingrained, this can act as an environmental cue or a trigger. So, for example, you may be wanting to do more strength-based work and you may want to do some press-ups, and you may say to yourself, well, actually, I'm going to do some press-ups. I'll do 5 press-ups every day straight after I clean my teeth, because cleaning our teeth is already an established routine, and we know that if we set a low bar, 5 press-ups, you'll probably do far more than that. And this highlights that it's time for your new action, which you may have to, it's still conscious, you're going to have to be trying quite hard to do this. So it makes it easier to latch onto, and we're less likely to forget it, because that environmental cue reminds us that, oh, maybe I need to think about some press-ups now because I've just cleaned my teeth. So this one is considering who you can share your plans with. We like to be seen as people that follow through with our intentions and stick to our word. So sharing plans with others around us can increase transfer, because once we've shared something, we often strive harder to achieve it. And it can also have the added benefit of sharing a little bit of responsibility. So more people know about this. They may be able to remind you of it when you forget. And then this one is about social support. It's considering, can anybody else around you help you on this journey, really, because increased social support can help maximize transfer. So that can be partners, families, friends, people at work. All of those types of people can encourage and support you towards some of your goals. And this external support can remove some of the perceived effort involved in this process for people. And they can also hold you accountable. They can ask you about how you're getting on with this, or did you manage to achieve that? A good example of this is I realized that when I cleaned my teeth, I swilled my mouth out with water afterwards, and that just washed away all the fluoride. So I then attempted to change that behavior. So I didn't sort of swill out with water afterwards, and it was really, really difficult to do that. And I told my partner about this, and she didn't do that. And it was great, because actually every time we went to clean our teeth together, she would remind me of what I said I wanted to do. So with that sort of double whammy, helped me to create that new habit. Also, who we surround ourselves with is important, because we can pick up their habits, and girls are more likely to become pregnant or be pregnant when others around them are. People are more likely to be obese when their friends are, and if people that we know smoke, we're also more likely to smoke. So this highlights really the importance of social acceptance and social pressure. So try and surround yourselves with people that support your intended actions, really. So considering what hurdles you may encounter. Problems are inevitable, so people need to know how to deal with them when they do arise. And identifying potential obstacles can increase people's capacity to overcome these when needed, and also realize their goals and their plans and their intentions. And thinking through some possible strategies for these, and how you can deal with these barriers. So if something happens, then you can do this instead. So my example here is, rather, if I was to say I was going to go running every Wednesday afternoon, for example, what do I do if it's raining? You know, I could still go out, but it's probably going to make me less likely to do that. So if it's raining, I could go to the gym at work instead, because it's nice and dry, or I could run to the gym in the evening instead if it's dry then. So this prior planning can help learners prepare for obstacles and distractions, really. And it can help to reduce the cognitive load later on, as we already have pre-considered responses to some of these situations. So straight away I know on Wednesday afternoon if it's raining, then I either go to the gym at work, or maybe I wait to see if it's raining in the evening. And these if-then plans that you consider up front can increase our follow-through with our goals. So worthy investment of time. The next component focuses on, it's often referred to in literature as copy and paste, but basically it just involves an individual reflecting on what factors or techniques have worked for them in the past, or considering what others around them do, and what seems to work for them to achieve certain goals. And one study found that this is a very, very potent strategy, and out of 22 different techniques that were tested, this one was the most effective. And in another study, this led to an extra hour a week of people exercising over a group that didn't use this. So it can be very simple, very cheap, very quick and easy to do. But this process, because you ask your friends, can make it social, which we know humans like. It makes it personalized, because it's about what worked for you, or it's about it's personalized or specific to a particular target. So how did you ensure that you went to the gym 3 times a week? What did you do to help you in relation to that? So it's relevant to a goal, and it gives people autonomy over considering what may work for them, which can increase our motivation and also can increase our effort. So the next one is about considering how we can change our physical environment to support our plans. And there's often more focus dedicated towards changing the individual rather than the environment. And one source in literature said that around 80% of performance problems are caused by environmental barriers rather than personal incompetencies. So it's quite important, the environment around us. And changes in this and our context can hugely influence our behaviour, and visual cues are significant prompts really to our behaviour, and objects also prompt certain actions. But this often occurs outside of our conscious awareness, so it's operating at a subconscious level. So we may not be aware of it. And it's easier to change the environment than it is to change the person. And a famous study in behavioural science changed the layout of certain food choices in a cafe, and that found that it can influence buying habits by up to 25%. So it can have a big impact on how people behave. So spend some time maybe focusing on how we can make desirable actions easier for us to do, but equally those undesirable behaviours, we can also make those harder and introduce some friction between us and those. The next one is about rewards, how we can make things seem more attractive or introduce rewards for our efforts. Because actions and behaviours need to be rewarding for us. And what is immediately rewarded is often repeated. So if we can make something seem more enjoyable or more desirable, then we're more likely to do it again in the future, because it can create a dopamine hit. Dopamine's sort of released when we experience enjoyable and pleasurable things, and we're keen to crave more of that in the future. So it creates a bit of a feedback loop. And humans have a greater tendency to place value on immediate gains, so things that make us feel good right now in the short term. So if some of our goals can have some sort of immediate benefits, either today, tomorrow, or next week, then that should release dopamine and then hopefully encourage us to keep doing this thing moving forwards, and provide a reason to stay on track. And often at the beginning of maybe trying to implement a new habit or do something for the first time, that's quite hard. So we may need to introduce some rewards early on just to try and increase our chances of sort of staying the course really. So you could give yourself a reward each time you perform a certain action, but it's important to remember that effort should be acknowledged and rewarded rather than outcome. Let's move this out of the way. So also considering the consequences. So every action or lack of action that we take has consequences, and humans are affected more by what they stand to lose than what we stand to gain. So we could possibly consider the potential losses by not doing this activity and this action or this behavior, which may trigger a loss aversion, a reaction to losing something. And loss aversion is a commonly used technique in behavioral science. And you often see it when you book train tickets, for example, online. They might say only 3 tickets left, which encourages you to go, oh, I don't want to miss out, so I'll book that quickly. But what they often don't mention is there's a lot more tickets left. They just may be slightly more expensive than the ones that are shown. But it encourages you to not want to lose out, so to buy quicker than maybe you ordinarily would. This one focuses on considering whether you can introduce any reminders. So it would be deliberately placing reminders to refocus our attention towards people's goals and their plans. And it acts as a form of self-nudging really, and a prompt, and it can enhance the likelihood of our desired behaviors. And automating aspects of our life can free up our mental energy, so that we can spend that on other things. So we can use technology to as a reliable reminder and prompt, and it acts as a form of insurance against human forgetfulness, really. It's easy to forget certain things. So utilizing technology just makes sense. And it can clear and free up space in people's working memory, which is very valuable. And it could include something like putting a photo on your fridge door, or a note somewhere prominent at home, or putting something on a key ring or in your wallet that you can see, or introducing a screensaver on your computer. So just a reminder of what this thing is and why it's important to you. It's also important to consider what success may look like for you, because achieving goals can be an ongoing quest, really. And it's important to recognize and celebrate your successes and your hard work that goes into this process. So consider what this will look like, and maybe what some indicators of success or progress may be for you. So for my running example, it could be that I managed to go every Wednesday, or that actually it's starting to feel a little bit easier for me and I'm starting to maybe enjoy the experience. And the final stage really focuses on monitoring. Now, there's a couple of different ways that this could possibly be done. But we know that establishing new habits will initially take a significant amount of effort and willpower, but will become easier over time. So we need to repeat things regularly towards becoming automatic solutions for us. And the more often we enact things and behaviors and actions, the more likely they are to become habitual. So to overcome the hard early stages where it's a bit of a grind to do this new thing, monitoring our progress can enhance, or can be an effective tool to enhance our motivation and our success. So there's two different ways of doing this, really. It can be done sort of semi-regularly, and that may look like considering where we are now in relation to our target and giving yourself a score out of 10. So how would I rate myself at the moment for going for a run once a week around my usual route that I'm familiar with, out of 10? So if I'm doing it every single week without fail, then that might be a 9 or a 10. But if actually I'm pretty sporadic at doing that, then it could be a 2 or a 3. And doing this can establish a benchmark where we can measure progress from, and it's a form of subjective self-scoring, really. And we can then focus on closing the gap. So if we're a 2 or a 3 now, then obviously we know that we would probably prefer to be an 8 or a 9. So we can focus on considering what we can do differently. So schedule times in to reevaluate and rescore yourself, and then you can maybe compare progress and scores over time. But for some people this may not be regular enough, and for some people it may work better for them to score themselves more regularly. So if you wanted to do an action or a behavior every day, for example, then you might need to do some sort of score sheet every day, or every time that the behavior is performed. And at the bottom there is just an example of sort of a visual score sheet that you could use to monitor your progress. And it just makes it obvious, and filling in your little boxes and giving yourself a score out of 10 just makes it satisfying. And you can put these physical sheets somewhere obvious, so in your diary or on the wall, and it's important to schedule that in when you have to fill it out, because to start off with it's going to be quite novel, it's going to be quite exciting to fill these things out, but very, very quickly it's going to become a bit of a drag. So you almost need to create your own habit just to fill out these sheets. So make it obvious, make it easy. But ultimately monitoring just allows you to observe your progress over time, and observe each small win and success and your actual behavior. So if you do end up missing lots of these desired things, then you'll see some gaps in your score sheets. So the final bit of the presentation really just considers how this resource could be used really in practice, and it could be implemented. So I think there's a couple of points I'm just going to discuss before I finish. But it's important that the finish line is reframed to center on behavior change or transfer of learning or the application of knowledge and skills after the course, and for practitioners to highlight that the course is only the first step of the process, and that more effort and willpower is going to be required moving forwards at home or at work. So time. The lack of time, energy, or headspace to consider how learning could be incorporated is often one of the main barriers for transfer and application. So it's important to plan for transfer when people have the time and also space to do so. And purposefully scheduling this in to programs can help facilitate people's clear thinking about their desired goals. And one source indicated that around 10% of the course or the program should be reserved for transfer planning. So I did a few quick calculations. If that's a day, an 8-hour day's worth of course, that's about 50 minutes dedicated to considering planning. If it's a weekend course, it's about an hour and a half. And if it's a full week residential, then it's 4 hours using this formula, which does seem quite a lot. But ultimately, I think for probably all of these, to me, it was probably a little bit more than I first thought is required to do this. And don't leave it until the end of the course either, because people are often tired and focusing on going home, and doing it then may result in just shallow information just to satisfy the coaches or the practitioners. And if we can support people's basic human needs on the course or the event, it can enhance their mental capacity, really, their working memory, their mental flexibility, and their self-control. And what that then can yield is it can free up people's capacity to consider the future and to think more broadly about some of these planning aspects. And because this process is quite mentally taxing, it's really important to ensure that the course or the program or the event offers support for this process, really. And staff could support learners by offering some examples maybe of some planning. You could go through this sheet and almost like I've provided these examples here, just to give them a bit more of a tangible, concrete sort of example to get them started. Or you could use a template to fill out, so that links back to the endowment effect. By providing examples and providing them a blueprint to just go and fill out, gets them started, and it gives them a nudge towards what you want them to do. And finally, once people have invested a little bit of time and effort into this process, then maybe they could discuss or share their plans with each other, and could create some form of social contract or agreement. And then that's going to tap into a little bit of social pressure, again, because we like to be seen as people that follow through with their actions. Making some sort of public commitment can actually increase people's likelihood of following through with some of these things. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through transfer of learning as a concept, and my resource sheet. But I hope it's provided some insight into things that practitioners may be able to do themselves quite cheaply, quite quickly, quite easily. And there are quite a lot of points there, but as we know, stacking them and combining them together can increase the impact. But then equally, it may take a lot longer to do that. So even if you only wanted to use a few of those from the resource, then great. Maybe just take out what you feel is necessary for you and your context. I've just got a few quotes here to finish on that highlight about knowledge is only as good as its application, really. It's all well and good knowing about something, but the value is in actually using it. Upcoming webinars moving forwards, I think the next ones are going to look at how we can create a welcoming and environment when people come to an event, and also create some sort of sense of belonging sort of when they're attempting to do new things. Maybe the one after that is going to focus on after courses, creating a buddy system where 2 or more people can lean on each other for support, trying to implement some of their goals. And at the bottom right there's my personal details on Twitter and email, so if anyone wanted to get in contact about any of these things, or they had any questions and want a little bit more information, then feel free to get in touch and I'd be happy to chat. So thank you for your time and tuning in and listening, and I hope it was useful, or some aspects were useful for you and your situation and your practice. So all the best, and see you again.